is a continent that comprises the westernmost part of Eurasia. Europe is bordered by the Arctic Ocean to the north, the Atlantic Ocean to the west, and the Mediterranean Sea to the south. To the east and southeast, Europe is generally considered as separated from Asia by the watershed divides of the Ural and Caucasus Mountains, the Ural River, and the Caspian and Black Seas, and the waterways of the Turkish Straits. Yet the non-oceanic borders of Europe, a concept dating back to classical antiquity, are arbitrary. The primary physiographic term continent as applied to Europe also incorporates cultural and political elements whose discontinuities are not always reflected by the continent's current overland boundaries. Europe is the world's second smallest continent by surface area, covering about 10,180,000 square kilometers, 3,930,000 square miles, or 2% of the Earth's surface, and about 6.8% of its land area. Of Europe's approximately 50 countries, Russia is the largest and most populous, spanning 39% of the continent and comprising 15% of its population, while Vatican City is the smallest both in terms of area and population. Europe is the third most populous continent after Asia and Africa, with a population of 739 to 743 million, or about 11% of the world's population. Europe has a climate heavily affected by warm Atlantic currents that temper winters and summers on much of the continent, even at latitudes along which the climate in Asia and North America is severe. Further from the Atlantic, seasonal differences are mildly greater than close to the coast. Europe, in particular ancient Greece, is the birthplace of Western civilization. The fall of the Western Roman Empire during the migration period marked the end of ancient history and the beginning of an era known as the Middle Ages. The Renaissance, human exploration, art, and science led to the Old Continent and eventually the rest of the world to the modern era. From this period onwards, Europe played a predominant role in global affairs. Between the 16th and 20th centuries, European nations controlled at various times the Americas, most of Africa, Oceania, and the majority of Asia. The Industrial Revolution, which began in the United Kingdom at the end of the 18th century, gave rise to radical economic, cultural, and social change in Western Europe, and eventually the wider world. Both world wars were largely focused upon Europe, contributing to a decline in Western European dominance in world affairs by the mid-20th century as the United States and Soviet Union took prominence. During the Cold War, Europe was divided along the Iron Curtain between NATO in the west and the Warsaw Pact in the east until the revolutions of 1989 and fall of the Berlin Wall. European integration led to the formation of the European Union, a political entity that lies between a confederation and a federation. The EU originated in Western Europe, but has been expanding eastward since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. The currency of most countries in the European Union, the euro, is the most commonly used among Europeans, and the EU's Schengen area abolishes border and immigration controls among most of its member states. Definition: the use of the term Europe has developed gradually throughout history. In antiquity, the Greek historian Herodotus mentioned that the world had been divided by unknown persons into three parts: Europe, Asia, and Libya, Africa, with the Nile and the river faces forming their boundaries, though he also states that some considered the river Don rather than the faces as the boundary between Europe and Asia. Europe's eastern frontier was defined in the 1st century by geographer Strabo. The river Don. The Book of Jubilees described the continents as the lands given by Noah to his 3 sons. Europe was defined as stretching from the Pillars of Hercules at the Strait of Gibraltar, separating it from North Africa, to the Don, separating it from Asia. A cultural definition of Europe as the lands of Latin Christendom coalesced in the 8th century, signifying the new cultural condominium created through the confluence of Germanic traditions and Christian Latin culture, defined partly in contrast with Byzantium and Islam, and limited to northern Iberia, the British Isles, France, Christianized western Germany, the Alpine regions, and northern and central Italy. The concept is one of the lasting legacies of the Carolingian Renaissance. Europa often figures in the letters of Charlemagne's court scholar Alcuin. This division, as much cultural as geographical, was used until the late Middle Ages, when it was challenged by the Age of Discovery. The problem of redefining Europe was finally resolved in 1730 when, instead of waterways, the Swedish geographer and cartographer von Strahlenberg proposed the Ural Mountains as the most significant eastern boundary, a suggestion that found favor in Russia and throughout Europe. Europe is now generally defined by geographers as the western part of Eurasia, with its boundaries marked by large bodies of water to the north, west, and south. Europe's limits to the Far East are usually taken to be the Urals, the Ural River, and the Caspian Sea. To the southeast, including the Caucasus Mountains, the Black Sea, and the waterways connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. History of the concept. Early history. The first recorded usage of Europe as a geographic term is in the Homeric hymn to Delian Apollo in reference to the western shore of the Aegean Sea. Modern definitions. The question of defining a precise eastern boundary of Europe arises in the early modern period as the eastern extension of Muscovy began to include northern Asia. Throughout the Middle Ages and into the 18th century, traditional division of the landmass of Eurasia into 2 continents, Europe and Asia, followed Ptolemy, with the boundary following the Turkish Straits, the Black Sea, the Kerch Strait, the Sea of Azov, and the Don, ancient Tanais. But maps produced during the 16th and 18th centuries tended to differ in how to continue the boundary beyond the Don band at Kalak na Donu, where it is closest to the Volga, now joined with it by the Volga-Don Canal, into territory not described in any detail by the ancient geographers. Philip Johann von Strahlenberg in 1725 was the first to depart from the classical Don boundary by drawing the line along the Volga, following the Volga north until the Samara Bend along Obshchi Sirt, the drainage divide between Volga and Ural, and then north along Ural Mountains, introducing the convention that would eventually become adopted as standard. The map makers continued to differ on the boundary between